Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Today, we are welcoming back on the show 2 guests that have been just very dear in this community, and they're return guests. Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer, a father-daughter duo who have written a book called A Church Called Tove, and they were on the podcast originally about that book, and now they have written another book as a follow-up called Pivot. And we are having them on today to talk about this book that's about to be released. Dr. Scot McKnight has been on the show. This is his 3rd time. He was on recently about his latest Bible translation called The Second Testament. But many of you know him also as the chair of New Testament at Northern Seminary up in Chicago. He's also the author of many, many books. Many of the favorites that many of you have talked to us about are the King Jesus Gospel. He's written commentaries on James, Galatians, 1 Peter. He was a part of this 2nd edition of Dictionary of Paul and His Letters that we had Dr. Lynn Kohick on talking about. And once again, many, many books that people have loved and read all around the world. But this book is very much anticipated that he is writing with Laura, his daughter, who is also a writer. She's also an elementary school teacher up in Chicago. And she has also been speaking pretty widely about both A Church Called Tove and is getting more speaking engagements now about Pivot. And we are so happy to have both of them on the show today. As you already probably know, A Church Called Tove has affected so many people in some very positive ways to help understand toxic cultures in faith-based environments, particularly churches. And it was born out of their experience at Willow Creek, which is where up in Chicago, a big mega church that has a church planning strategy that's been used by many churches. And so A Church Called Tove was born out of the big sort of fallout that happened when the lead pastor there had many sexual assault allegations. And just, that story continues to unfold. But this book has been very helpful to so many to understand abusive cultures in church environments. And so Laura nudged her dad to write this book as the story goes. And apparently now there's a sequel. We'll see if they have a 3rd. Who knows? But they're on today to talk about Pivot. Also, A Church Called Tove has received a Christian Book Award finalist nomination. And it's well-deserved. This book has been read by so many people in this community, I know. And we're excited to talk to them today about this next book, Pivot, to see what they have to say about the how of some of this and not just the what. So many of us are asking the question, we understand what's wrong, but how are we going to make it better? So they're on today to talk about that. So a very warm welcome back to the show, Dr. Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer. Hello, Scot and Laura, and welcome back to the A World of Difference podcast.
Thanks for
Good
having
to
us.
see you again, Lori. Thank you. Yeah.
Super exciting to have you both on here again, and also announcing your new book that's coming out, which a lot of people have been waiting for. A follow-up to A Church Called Tove, which is what you were speaking about the last time you were here on the podcast. And this book has done so much good. It's made such a difference in my life, but in the lives of many people listening to this podcast and so many people around the world that have read it and engaged with it. So we're all super excited that there's a book coming out now called Pivot, where you're kind of going a little deeper into some of the questions you've been getting in the aftermath of this book. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but to just share a little bit of the overview of what Pivot's about and how it continues this conversation around abuse in the church.
You want me to share, Dad?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, so in the months, and I should say weeks, months, years following the publication of A Church Called Tove, we were getting questions that became more frequent. People would read Tove, and it gave them a language and helped them maybe identify some of the red flags or toxic patterns that they might see in their church or their organization. And more frequently, my dad and I were getting asked, well, what do we do? How do we transform a culture? Or I'm a lay person. Is there anything I can do? Or what red flags should we look for? Another one was, we really like a church called Tove and we want to have a Tove church. How do we transform our culture to make it good? And that's really how the book started, is whereas Tove, our friend Steve Carter says, Tove is more the what, the problem. Pivot is more the, okay, how do we fix it? And so it's our best attempt to answer those questions that we had been getting frequently.
Yeah. And when we wrote the Tove book, we were concerned with marks of toxicity that we were finding in institutions, churches, even businesses. We've had some business people contact us about toxicity in the workplace. And I, of course, because I teach at an institution, I'm sure Laura has to do this. We have to take, I don't know, go through workplace programs on the computer to go through all this stuff and learn about it. It's everywhere. Everybody needs to be aware of these things. So we found some marks of toxicity, and we were asking ourselves at that time, what would be the opposite? So let's say the moral Christian alternative to these toxic workplaces and toxic churches. So that's where we came up with the marks of Tove, which is the Hebrew word for good and goodness. So then, churches are sort of places where they want to fix things. This is what they're supposed to do, So we get a lot of questions of what can we do, and we were sort of like, well, read our book. But over time, we began to think about what would be the steps that someone would have to go through to actually transform a toxic church or a toxic workplace. And we had some ideas, of course, and I was teaching on it in my classes with pastors who had ideas. But I had a student in the back of my class who, like, this is an intensive all day long, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And like on Tuesday or Wednesday, he says, I have something to say here. And he's auditing. He said, I did a PhD in organizational transformation. I went, oh boy, oh boy. And he's made a really funny remark. He said, Lori says to me, you have all the right ideas, but all the wrong words. It's because I was using theological terms all the time. So he told me about a book by Edgar Schein on organizational transformation and psychology and leadership. And then I found out that I had an old friend who taught with Edgar Schein at MIT. And he said he's the real deal. And so Laura and I both read this book very carefully. And that helped us sort of craft some of the organization for the book. But the really oddest thing about this book as we wrote it was, I don't know how many times I thought to myself, but I said this to Laura numerous times. I think every chapter could be the first chapter. It was that sort of book where this theme is important. It could lead to this, or you could start here and it would lead to that. And so we had a little bit of trouble finding the organization that we thought would work. And we had a really nice editor who helped us sort these things out. So now we have priorities, practices, and the powers.
Yes.
Of
3 Ps.
Transforming your.
Yes.
Yeah,
great Ps. Alliteration. Yep. You stuck with all that churchiness, didn't you?
Makes us a Baptist, doesn't it?
That's right. That's basically going to be in the new Baptist Faith and Message Amendment. I'm pretty sure. I heard that. I'm just kidding. 3 Ps. Definitely easy to remember and helpful. And I think that when things are hard and confusing and you are being either gaslit or abused on a church staff or a business, Christian business, or any business, it can be helpful to have things in your brain that stick there because it's so hard to navigate when you're in a toxic culture. And so I know that you've heard so many stories of people who've come to you after a church called Tove. And this book is another act of love where you're using your brain and you're really researching and you're connecting with people and organizational understanding of how organizations can pivot indeed, but also bringing in the church experience that's very specific in this way is really helpful. I think that Scott, you and I last interview we had, which was about your New Testament translation, and you were mentioning Darvo, which is this concept a lot of us know now. But when we think about that, this whole deny that the abuser did anything wrong, the A is like you attack the person that's actually being abused. And then that's sort of the gaslighting part of it all. And then the reversing victim and offender is the part that just really, unfortunately, works really well. And that's why it is used so often. So as people are reading a church called Tove, they're still navigating, a lot of them, this Darvo, and it's hard. And it's some of the things I know people were reading in a church called Tove. It's like, yeah, I want to make these changes, but how? So here's your book and about the 3 Ps. So walk us through. You've got priorities, practices, and powers. Who wants to talk about those? Or do you want to split them up? You don't have to ruin anything in the book. I want people to buy your book, but just like high level, what are you talking about with these priorities, practices, and powers?
First thing that we have to ask Lori is, when you hear the word pivot, what do you think of?
COVID.
No, that's good. It's good. No, it's something from some TV show. What is it?
Okay, so when my dad pitched this title, Pivot, I said, Dad, you cannot name this book Pivot. That's the famous Friends episode with the couch where they're trying to get
Pivot.
the couch up the stairs and Ross is shouting, Pivot, Pivot.
Right.
And being a theologian that he is, he's like, I've never seen that episode. I don't even know what show you're talking about. And I said, it's really a famous show. So we went back and forth about that.
It's so true. But it's a great name. I like the name. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll talk about the priorities, but I mean we can probably each take one. I don't know if Laura has it organized, outlined in front of her, but in a sense there were like 8 or 9 topics in the Pivot book, and we can organize them by priorities. And we think that this is really important in the business world. I think it's Peter Drucker who says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, or something like this. And as we were doing the Tove book, I became convinced that character eats culture before it eats strategy for breakfast. So I thought character is such an important topic, and it determines the kind of culture that happens. So it's not, culture just doesn't happen. Something has to be at work to form a culture, and it will be the virtues and the character. So we think that one of the most important things that has to happen in toxic workplaces, toxic cultures, toxic churches, institutions, is for a revolution of what matters most, and that is a concentration on character development in the people involved. And this is odd to say, but in churches, this is a revolution because instead of focusing on individual character development, churches work on productivity and numerical increase. You know, the B's, I think we learned some of this from Steve Carter. Bills in the plate, butts in the pew, bills in the plate, baptisms in the water, and then I added one, buildings on the campus. Those are the measurements that we use. And we think that Christian institutions, moral institutions, need to start focusing on character.
We're
and this used to be.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I feel like this goes far beyond churches too. I work in the field of education. We hire for skill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up having, in the case of Willow Creek, you have, and everywhere really, you have really skilled people, but they don't have the character sometimes to match their skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Skill, yeah, and skill is productive. That's the problem with it. So we wanted to focus on character, and we have some things in the book that help people just sort of take character tests and where you can go online to find these things. And but I also think that this is really it really is going to upset the apple cart. So the book that we told the story of to begin with is in California with Mike Lucan and Kent Carlson when they were there. Oak Hill, right, Laura? Oak Hill.
Hills.
Yeah, Oak Hills. And they transformed a mega church based on the Willow Creek model that was doing extremely well. It was popular and lines of people wanting to talk to whoever spoke on the platform that weekend at the end of every service. They decided to focus on Dallas Willard's ideas of transformation. So they quickly reduced their church in about a half and the budget in about half.
The staff were totally confused because they were hired to produce and their skill.
Yeah.
And they were, and the two pastors were fumbling their way forward as they were trying to figure out how to do this. As Mike told me, he said, I wish we had your book before we started. I thought, I wish we'd written the book before you started too, but we didn't know anything about it then. So character is one of the most important things that we think should be emphasized in institutions.
Yeah.
The second one, I don't know, this is kind of my topic, is power. How every institution, every church has power. People have power. They have authority. Authorized power is authority. And how you use power really matters in a culture and in a church, in an institution, in a business. And we break it down into 4 prepositions, I think. Maybe it's 3. I go back and forth, depends on which ones I remember. And that is power over, is sort of domination, is that people say, I can tell you what to do, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And if you don't like it, you can leave. That's the power. That sounds like football, military. Mm-hmm. The second one is power with, and that is when people have the virtue. Well, no, power to is second. That's the influence. You have to recognize that your power to influence people is important. And you don't want to use the power over, but you do have the power to influence. Then a power with is where you're willing to move sideways on the platform, allow someone else to be on the platform, or to have other people at the table who make decisions or share leadership in genuine ways. And then the fourth one is power for, and that is to use your power for the good of someone else, to empower them to do what they do. So we really believe that power is one of the priorities that institutions need to start considering much more seriously if they want to transform a culture.
So good. Yeah, it is really about character. I hear this so often. And I love, Laura, that you mentioned that it's not just a conversation in the church. Certainly, it is an issue in the church and all faith based spaces, but you work in education, I work in business. Character can make or break a business or a person's career. And, we're seeing that happen sometimes even here in Silicon Valley. You'll hear things. I don't want to mention any names, but how character, affects it. It can affect a lot of people's lives. If you're a CEO of a big, social media company, for example, and how you treat people really matters. How you treat your employees. Do you listen? Listening is something I work in leadership and development at a global tech company, and our first monthly manager call that I arranged recently with our 300 people that are involved in this call is, let's work on listening. This is a skill for the next month. We did a Harvard Business Review video that we watched together. There's different ways to listen. We're practicing listening with each other. In a way, it's not rocket science, but it's hard. And it's not the kind of thing you typically talk about first. You talk about, like you said, Scott, it's like if it's a church context, it's like the butts and seats, the baptisms, the bucks, the buildings, the campus. But in business, it's also about profit and sales and products and that kind of thing. But if it's, there's a lot of conversation right now about AI, right? For example, and we're seeing this happen in the strikes that are going on with the writer's strike and the actors, right? It's like, well, ethically, we could just let AI do everything, but it's not ethical to human beings for us to go that route completely, And in business, the way we talk about it is we need to learn to use AI to help us, but we are empathetic human beings. We are emotional human beings, and emotion is good, and it can be used for evil or good. And so as we're creating these emotionally healthy environments, that's not something we can rely on robots or people who act like robots to do well. We need character. We need people first. And so as you've been writing this book, what are some practical steps or strategies that church leaders in particular can implement to create these safer, emotionally healthy cultures where there's psychological safety for people?
Assess where you're at. We found that to be, I think we learned that from Shine, from some of the research. I don't remember where we learned it, but we learned it somewhere. And it became really, we felt essential to the process of any sort of transformation or character growth was for individuals and at the team level, the organization level, to assess where they're at. So in our book, Pivot, we developed a, I don't know what you would call it. It's an assessment. It's not statistically normed or anything like that, but it goes through our circle of Tove, like people first, justice, empathy, truth telling, and it allows individuals to assess where the organization is. So Shine is really big on, you have to know what the problem is before you can just charge forward with any sort of transformation. And you have to be specific about it. So organizations might be able to take the churches might be able to take our Tove, we call it the Tove tool, and they might find, okay, we're really good at being empathetic. People feel safe here, but this is an area like, let's say, justice, where we're not so great. We've scored low, and really, sometimes confronting our own character is the hardest of all. It's really going to take vulnerability and a willingness to listen, but that has revealed itself to be an essential step in the process, is knowing where you are and where you've been before you can move forward.
It's good. Do you find, as you've been working with churches, because I know you've probably been asked to consult with different churches in this process in the time since you wrote Tove, do you find that a lot of churches reach out, but they're really not serious about it? It's almost like a game, and they're not serious about doing that deep listening work and really assessing where they've been and being honest. Is that common or not common?
Well, I've tried to avoid becoming a church consultant. uh, that's a business, and I'm a professor, and Laura's a public school teacher, so it can get pretty intense. But um, more than a few times, I have had letters from pastors and leaders who say they're working on Tove when I know they just want the right message to be out there rather than. I really don't think there are many churches that could use the Tove tool. And I think there's 7 separate sections. Is that right, Laura? 7 sections? I think
however
it is.
Many are in the circle of Tove. That's how many there are.
7.
Yeah.
If you do one of these a month in let's just say, some kind of safe small groups, let's say you have 50 employees and you get 10 little groups of 5, and they each go through these in a safe way so that they can say what they think and no one's going to fire them for what they think. I don't think there's any institution that won't come up short on a few of these categories. And those are some things then that those organizations, those churches, institutions, whatever, can begin working on something that can make a difference in their organization. And so we think that these will be conversation starters in the Tove tool and, let's say, discomforting revelations of some practices and some habits that are in need of some attention. Yeah. But I also think it's unlike what you're going to get in the business world. It's not going to be quite like that. It's, in a sense, it's too moral for the typical business world, which is going to be a little bit more boilerplate type stuff because you can't get too specific sometimes. So I think it can really help.
To answer your question, so the Tove tool isn't out yet. We haven't had it comes out with the book. It's part of the book. So we haven't had churches use it yet, and I'm really hopeful about hearing about those conversations. But we have met with a number of church, like a church. I'm thinking of a church plant. I'm thinking of a Canadian church that we had a meeting with. I'm thinking of Zacharias Ministries. We met with them. Typically, the people that ask to meet with us see toxic patterns and are asking for help.
Yeah, right. And are they typically people that can make a change? Because I think that's always the difficult part, right? You might have a staff member who has a lead pastor who's, whatever version of narcissism on that spectrum that he might lie, and they're, when you're dealing with that, you just get fired in retaliation for, like, that happened to me, right? So you can't call it out without experiencing retaliation. So are people that reach out to you often the decision makers or just the ones that notice it, do you think?
Well, I think it varies, and maybe Laura has something else to add here. I think in general, it's people who see the problem and want to do something about it and are looking for process, procedures, steps. What can we do to, let's say, you've been involved in this at a very serious level. What can we do to make this known, to make it clear? What can we do to convince these people that this is a problem? That's the one that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And what can we do to help transform the culture? So, like we've met with some pretty high powerful people in organizations who were still below, let's say, the board and the president. a lot of these are one person president founders. They make the decisions. And until that person is convinced that there's need for something to change, nothing's going to change.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part for so many people, isn't it? I really do hope that your book gets read by people who are starting to be more self-aware. I know that, Chuck DeGroat's been on the podcast, and I know that when you're dealing with narcissism, it's a whole other thing. And a lot of therapists won't even treat people with narcissistic personality disorder because they just don't see a lot of results of things changing. And that can feel really hopeless, both for people on a staff working with somebody like that. And I think, betrayal blindness it's a real thing. The same person who coined the term Darvo talks a lot about that as well. And it's something that a lot of people grow up, and your wife, Chris, we should bring her in for this part of the conversation because she's the psychologist. But I mean, people who've grown up in households where they had to use betrayal blindness to survive, because to admit something was going wrong meant they would be out on the street. And in often cases of domestic violence, that's what's going on with a spouse. That's like, to confront this fact that the person is abusing me means I will lose everything. And being on a church staff can feel similar. You'll lose your whole faith community. You'll lose your income. You'll lose where your kids go to youth group. And so I know that you've faced that with people. And so betrayal blindness is something we use to protect ourselves. And it also is something that victims, as they come out, walk through a lot of shame about, like, why didn't I notice it sooner? But there's so much psychology around it. But I really do hope that, for me, I was coming out of that betrayal blindness when I picked up a church called Tove, and it's what helped me see. There were so many words in there. So I'm really hoping Pivot will do that for people who are open to the possibility that something's going wrong and that they can make a difference either for themselves or others or both. As you've done your research and your interviews, is there any story in particular that stood out to you that you just think would inspire us to want to make a difference in this area? And it could be a story that ended well or one that didn't end well. Either way, I think that either we can be inspired by either one of those to bring change. But do either one of you have a story from your experience of Tove and writing this book that you think is helpful for us?
The story of Oak Hills comes to my mind right away. I think so. Long ago, when we were writing Pivot, my dad had this book sent to my house. Well, first he had this huge Edgar Schein research book sent to my house. It was like this, it was thick. And then he sent me a beautiful little book called Renovation of the Church. And I had never heard of it before. I had never heard of these co-pastors, Mike Lucan, Kent Carlson. But it became the central case study and focus of Pivot, because they came to Willow Creek actually for a conference and went back to their church in Folsom, California, Oak Hills, and they created an attractional model based on what they had learned at Willow Creek. And they're not critical of Willow Creek. In fact, they said it worked. We had thousands of people in attendance. Well, as weeks and months and years went on, they started to feel increasingly agitated, like in their spirit. And they felt like our model of doing church is actually doing the opposite. It's not tending to people's souls. We have created consumers, and we put on a great service, and then they called it like a monster in the basement. And then the monster needs to be fed, and the people want an even better service next weekend. So I could keep going, because that story just, it really has stood out as they paid attention to what the Spirit was stirring in their soul. And they surrendered to it and ended up, we tell the whole story in Pivot, or you can just read their book, Renovation of the Church. They changed their entire way of doing church. And like my dad mentioned at the beginning, it was really hard. The staff was completely confused. They lost half of their congregation because the congregation didn't want to come to learn how to learn about Jesus and what he taught. They wanted a show, and it was painful. But at the end, they would say it was worth it, because we did what we felt we were called to do, and they felt like they just felt so uncomfortable with what they had become.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree with what Laura's saying. I think that church experience with Oak Hills is a real good example of what goes on. Um, here's something that needs to be learned, and this is from that. I learned this first from that student who was in the back of my class, and he said one of the things you need to know about organizational transformation is when the leaders and the workers are committed to transformation, change of an institution. It takes 7 years to transform the culture, and I would say this is really important for whatever organization is thinking of making some radical changes. To we actually distinguish between change, shift, and transformation. And so transformation is at the deepest level. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be very painful. It's going to be hard. And you're going to have to get ownership from the top down and from the bottom up. And a lot of churches, my experience, is they work from the top down. You know, some visionary entrepreneurial leader has the idea, and then we want to implement it. And of course, the next year they got another idea. This is how mega churches work, isn't it?
It sounds like education.
Is they're always trying to recreate things and do this.
Adapt a new curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we learned is you have to build a coalition. To build a coalition, you have to have, let's just say, someone who's a leader of the whole vision. But then that person has to have conversations with other people to start building a coalition. To build a coalition, though, you have to have the skill of not only listening, but learning, and learning together so that let's say now you've moved this to 12 people. Are they all invested in this now because they contributed, or have you persuaded them to go along with what you want? Mm-hmm. If it's the persuasion model, it's not going to happen. But if you work with a coalition and build out small groups, bigger, eventually get to where you're actually going into the entire system. That's going to take a long time to build ownership. I talked to a pastor who told me that he did not go to the congregation for 5 years. It was 5 years of on-ramp work to work with different people in the church and to listen to one another, to build the kind of shift and transformation that they wanted to do. So we have some ideas of how things can happen, but this isn't a cookie cutter. You know, if you drop down this video, you're going to have, you know, you can't do a video at work on sexual abuse and eliminate sexual perverts in your in your workplace. That's not going to change them like that. This is a long-term process. So there's a lot of work that's involved here.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad that you're emphasizing that point, because I think that some of the cultures that are maybe sort of the target audience for this book are the very ones who want a quick and easy fix. And, the mega church model that churns out services, and every week's a new week, and it might be a completely different situation of a whole new curriculum. But at the same time, it's not about the next biggest hit that we're addicted to. It's about deep work that walks through shame, and it does repair, takes Yom Kippur seriously, like you mentioned, in a church called Tove. And it's gritty and it's messy and it's not flashy and glitzy and filled with a foggy stage. It's something very different. And so thank you for this work. It is so important. I have great optimism that it's going to do all kinds of wonderful things. And it's going to also probably create a third book out there, because then there's going to be new questions that come out. And so
no more.
He's like, I'm
Don't
done.
encourage Laura.
You've got 3 P's. I mean, it would feel strange to not have a third at this point. So. Anyway, just thank you so much to you both. I know that you have whole other lives and careers and families, but you would take time to write a book like this to help make a difference. It really means a lot to me and to so many of us that I know that are going to read it and learn more information about how we can make a difference together. I really just hope people buy this book, and I'm going to give you the opportunity just to say, where's the best place to buy it? Where can people find you and your writing and follow more of what you're both doing?
We have a
Go ahead,
website,
Laura.
churchcalledtove.org. Everything is linked on it. The new book, the old book.
Perfect.
And we both have Twitter. Do you have Twitter, Laura?
Yes.
You still have
For
Twitter?
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have Twitter. Hey, I have Threads.
I do too. I love it there.
I have
It's much
have
fun.
Threads.
too. I'm not sold on Threads. There's pieces of it that I just don't like as much as Twitter. It is nicer.
Definitely.
People are nice.
Yes, that's the part I like. Yeah.
I like that I was early on Threads.
Yes.
And then I have Twitter.
You sent me an invitation, Dad.
Yeah,
thought,
that's
whoa.
pretty.
Lori, make sure you put that on the air that I sent her the invitation.
Scott's the tacky one in this family. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
definitely not that. But, and then we have, I have a Substack.
Yes.
So,
of course, which we love.
Type my name in Substack, and then that's where it pops up. We don't have, I'm not using the blog at Christianity Today. I think they're going to eliminate blogs. So
yeah.
that was the plan. So,
well, your Substack is awesome. I love it. So thanks for doing that and keeping us connected with other authors and all the ways that you do that there. Yeah. So check out all these things. Go to the website. We'll link everything in the show notes. And we're ending this main interview for now, but for those of you who are in a difference maker community, you'll get an extra little exclusive one question mini-sode that we'll do with them. So thanks for being on the show today, Scott and Laura, and for this book. And I just hope it does make a huge difference everywhere that it lands.
Thank you for having us again. It was nice to see you.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, we've had the what of A Church Called Tove, and now we have the how of this new book, Pivot, which gives us understandings of all kinds of alliteration around priorities and practices and powers that we can use to help transform our churches and our faith-based spaces into Tove or goodness cultures. It was just so great having them back on. As Scott said, he's a theologian, he's a writer. Laura's a school teacher and a writer, and they're just offering this book to us, and it's up to us what we do with it, right? It could just sit on our shelf. It could sit in the Amazon cart. It could be in our Audible. We never listen to it. Or it can be the kind of thing that we read. We read with a group of people even, or we just discuss it with others in a community, either online or in person or in our churches and other faith-based spaces. But definitely, I hope this podcast has spurred you on and inspired you to say, you know what? If we all do just our part to call things out that are wrong, to expose the darkness that exists in some of our cultures, to even just raise your hand and say, something's not right, to just be that one person joined with other people who are willing to acknowledge the wrong. And, as Scott mentioned, it's not easy. This is not easy work, but to throw our hands up in the air and say there's nothing we can do and just accept that cultures are going to be toxic, I'm just not here for that. I hope you're not either, because I do believe there is hope. I do believe that joining together, either virtually or in person, or just getting our brains around this problem with all of our perspectives is what is going to help us change it. That's the whole point of the A World of Difference podcast. We bring our differences to the table, our different perspectives as men, as women, of people of different cultural backgrounds, language backgrounds. Several of you who listen to this podcast, many of you are second language English speakers. And so wherever we are in the world, whatever our background is, our perspective in this conversation is so important. Maybe there's something you're bringing to the table that is a real key to unlocking how some of this can really shift forward. we are constantly looking for ways to change these systems and make them better. And Scott and Laura are offering us this book. This second book is a labor of love. It's not easy to come together as a father and daughter. I can't imagine writing a book together and how much work that took, just scheduling it all. But let's take what they've given us and let's take it the step further. Once it's in our hands, that's our resource to do something with it. I'd love to hear how you're resonating with this book. And please join us in our Difference Maker community. You can join into this membership club for as little as $5 a month. And we have a little bit of extra exclusive episode with them as they go a little bit deeper on this conversation there. So we'll be posting that on our site for Difference Makers. It's patreon.com/aworldofdifference. But once again, we'd just love for you to reach out any way you want. You could tag me on Twitter. You can find us on Threads. Scott's there. And let us know how you're resonating with this book and what little nuggets you're taking with you to just make something just one step ahead in the right direction. And maybe you're one step ahead than the rest of us, and you can reach out your hand to us and pull us forward. We're all in this together. I'm glad to be in this with you. And I'm just so honored to have these two on the show today. Let us know how you're resonating with this and how it's making a difference in your life and how you're using it to make a difference in the lives of others all around you. Keep making a difference wherever you are. I appreciate all of you. Take care. We'll talk next week. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper. Well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/aworldofdifference.